Good afternoon. My name is Dana Lasek. I'm here with Dr. Parker. We are both with CRG, and we are happy to okay. Good afternoon. My name is Dana Lasek, and I am with Dr. David Parker, and we are here from CRG. We are doing a webinar this afternoon on the emotional health of college students, challenges and supports. We want to welcome you to the webinar. And first, we'd like to tell you just a little bit about us, and then we will get started with the information. So I'm Dr. Lasek. I have a PhD in psychology, and I've been working in the area of therapy and testing for over 16 years. I primarily work with adolescents and adults, issues, a wide range of issues, including depression, anxiety, ADHD, relationship issues. I have experience with presentations and webinars in the areas of emotional dysregulation, anxiety, weight management, and understanding the DSM, just to name a few. I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Dr. David Parker, and he'll share a little bit of information about his background.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. We're glad you're here. And again, my name is David Parker. I'm a post-secondary disability specialist and also an ADD life coach here at CRG. During most of my career, I worked in college settings. I specialize in working with students with learning disabilities like dyslexia and or ADHD. You can see on the screen that I've worked at a number of public and private universities. I'm also a researcher and author, and have had the pleasure of studying coaching in the college setting in a number of studies, and just really found that it's effective for lots of students. Like Dr. Lasek, I also speak at the state, national, and have had the chance to also speak in other countries around the world about this work. So we're really glad that you're here. We hope today's information will be helpful to you. We're going to preview some research and background first, and then talk about some practical strategies second. But before we proceed, just some housekeeping notes, particularly if you're new to this form of a webinar. If you haven't yet, you might want to turn your volume all the way up. That can make it easier for you to hear us. You can use the chat feature in the panel on the right side of your screen at any point to write into Angela Beard, who's hosting us today and coordinating the technology. If you have any questions or problems, just type something in the chat and she'll type back and see if she can help you with that during the presentation. You can download the PowerPoint slides if you'd like and follow along. As is probably obvious at this point, hopefully you're going to be hearing us without any problem but not seeing us today. We'll also post this webinar and the audio recording that goes with it to our website, and you may know that we do that with all of our webinars. If you go to the CRG main page in the upper right-hand corner, there's a red YouTube icon, and if you click on that, give us a week or two after today, but we always, again, post all of the webinars there so you can get to them, to look at them again, to share them with others, or to just make people aware of that resource. We hope that's helpful to you. We'll try and save the last 10 minutes for any questions or comments that, again, you can type into the chat box at any point. So we look forward to hearing more from you about what we may be trying to quickly address before the session is over today, or the webinar is over. And then finally, you can earn Category 2 continuing education credits if you're interested in that and need that in your professional setting. We'll send a brief evaluation out to everybody via email after today's webinar, and also more information about that certification as well, too. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Lasek at this point.
Okay, so now we want to find out who our audience is today. If you can fill out the question on your screen, and we're asking, is your primary role in participating today as a parent, a high school staff member, a college service provider, mental behavioral health provider, student, or other? And we'll give you just a little bit of time to fill that out for us. Okay, so it looks like 25% of our audience today are made up of parents, 38% are college service providers, and 38% are mental behavioral health providers. So that's really good information for us to know today.
Again, welcome everybody. We're glad you could take time to join us.
Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about the trends in the emotional health needs of college students in the U.S., the reasons for these trends, resilience and grit, a framework for understanding emotional well-being, how can we support students' emotional well-being, and more information. And then we're also going to have question and answer. We're going to leave some time at the end for some questions and answers. So let's get started. This generation, we call them the Millennials. They are an amazing generation for a number of reasons. This generation has the highest GPAs, more advanced placement credits, more service learning hours, and more advanced technology skills than any past generation. This generation has also applied to and been accepted into more colleges than any prior generation. The problem is there are a lot of costs that come with these accomplishments. And what we are finding in the research is that college counseling centers, the field of psychology, counseling, and higher education, disability services are all reporting a change in the emotional health of our college students. So what are they seeing? In terms of the college counseling centers, they are reporting a rise in the number of students seeking services. Of these students, there's an increase in the rates of depression and substance abuse. There's a rise in the number of mental health diagnoses. So in the past, most students coming to the college counseling center would be diagnosed with one diagnosis. Today, maybe students are diagnosed with 2 or even 3 different mental health diagnoses. We are also seeing changes in the severity of the presenting issues. So the issues they are reporting, a little bit more severe mental health issues, so more severe depression, maybe even some schizophrenia, some bipolar disorder. So we are seeing a change in the severity of these issues. The other studies have also shown that this 2003 study, which was a 13-year study from 1988 to 2001, across this 13-year span, this study found that students seen for depression doubled during that time. Students seen for suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts tripled. Students seen for sexual assault quadrupled. And there was a significant increase in students seen for anxiety and stress. A study in 2001, and now these are just freshmen. This is a nice study because it's a fairly large group. Also, these students are represented from 50 four-year institutions. So this is a wide range study that has some very significant information. This study showed that the rates of depression among freshmen nearly doubled. And also untreated depression, they found, can lead to school failure, social isolation, substance abuse, and promiscuity. So again, over the years, the depression has almost doubled rates among freshmen. Another study in 2010 found that 1 in 4 or 5, so 20 to 25% of students visiting a university health center reported feeling depressed. And this is very significant because, again, these students are coming in for health concerns. Maybe they have a cold or they have some kind of health issue going on. And when they are screened, these students will report and will admit that they are also feeling depressed. This is very significant because even though the stigma around mental health is changing, we do know that in medical health settings, most people are more likely to admit that they are feeling some mental health issues more easily within a health center rather than necessarily a counseling center. So these students that are coming to the health center can then be referred to the counseling center. And that this shows the importance of screening these students. Okay. As we've known for many years, substance abuse among college students is definitely on the rise, and it's definitely a very significant problem on campus. I added this quote because I think it just sums up the issue with substance abuse. Dr. Judith Vermali from University of Vermont, a former president, she said, underage drinking and excessive drinking have negative effects on everything we're trying to do at a university. So while drinking is kind of a rite of passage among college students, it's very common, excessive drinking puts these students at risk for so many issues. Social isolation, increased violence among each other. Also, it increases the risks for poor academic performance. And the study listed below there found that even to the point of accidents or death, that 1,400 college students die each year from alcohol-related injuries. Students who abused alcohol were more likely to commit assault, sexual assault, and vandalism. 20% of full-time college students use illicit drugs, and serious mental illness correlates with substance dependence and abuse. And there's a lot of research to that final point that students tend to self-medicate if they are experiencing an untreated mental illness. So untreated depression, for instance, many students will use alcohol or drugs to self-medicate to make themselves feel better. The flip side is also true, where if a student develops a substance abuse or dependence problem during college, they're also much more likely to also be depressed. So this is very significant that we watch these students with the combination of substance abuse and mental health issues. So the research is also showing us that not only the students are coming to counseling centers more often, they are depression's on the rise, anxiety's on the rise, substance abuse, but also the severity of the mental illness is on the rise. So an 11-year study from 1998 to 2009, 93% of the students seeking mental health in 1998 presented with one diagnosis. By 2009, so 11 years later, 96% had at least one diagnosis, often more than one. So we're seeing one or two or even more diagnoses presenting at the College Counseling Center. We're seeing an increase from moderate to severe depression from 34 to 41%. And what we know about the students as well is that these students with severe mental illness are requiring and needing more resources than other students. So a student with some mild depression or mild anxiety may be comfortable seeing a therapist once a week, which is typical at a counseling center. Maybe a student with some more severe mental illness, maybe severe depression, maybe they need to be seen several times a week. Maybe they're calling the crisis line. Maybe there are often more resources on campus that are helping these few students. So the resources that are out there that are on campus are being used up more by the students with more severe mental illness, which makes sense. But there are some issues with this, which we'll talk about in a minute. This study also showed that there's a rise in students on medication, so 11% to 24%. And while this is a good thing, it also can cause problems for the students in terms of getting their medication, taking their medication as they should. Okay, so some more studies that we looked at. These first two studies are from the American College Health Association, and the first study was done in 2011. So 90% of the students that they surveyed reported feeling so depressed that it was difficult to function. So again, we're seeing this severe level of depression. 50% felt overwhelming anxiety in the last 12 months. The next study was done in 2012, showed that 25% of college students reported diagnosis or treatment of mental health conditions within the past year. So 11% anxiety, 10% depression, and then 80% felt overwhelmed by all they had to do, and 45% felt at times that things were hopeless. So what does all this mean? This last study is from the first year college student report. And with all this these emotional issues and sometimes this untreated mental health issues, the severity has increased. The types of mental health issues have changed over the years. Students are saying that they are not prepared emotionally for school. 87% of the 1,502 first-year college students reported that they received much more help with their academic preparation before college than their emotional readiness. 60% wish they had received more help preparing emotionally. 50% felt stressed most or all of the time during year one, and 36% felt that they were not in control of managing their day-to-day stress. So we are seeing, this is very consistent with kind of what we would expect. We are spending a lot of time preparing all these students academically, but we're not preparing them emotionally. And so they're coming to campus feeling overwhelmed and isolated and depressed, and it's taking its toll academically on them as well. So the Office of, or the Disability Services is also reporting information that's very consistent with the College Counseling Center. So I think the good news is this information is very consistent across different facets within the university. The disability services are reporting that students with psychiatric disabilities make up about 24% of the approximately 11% of undergraduates who report a disability. So this is, again, students with a DSM-5 diagnosis, such as PTSD, major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar, obsessive-compulsive disorder, panic disorder, and personality disorder. So again, these are the students who have been diagnosed with a DSM diagnosis. These are not the students who feel anxious or feel a little bit down. These are students who have a diagnostic, what am I trying to say? I'm sorry.
Category or condition?
Condition, yes. Thank you, Dr. Parker. Of these students, 86% with psychiatric disabilities withdraw prior to degree completion, as opposed to 47% of students with other types of disabilities and 36% without disabilities. This is a huge number and something that universities really need to be aware of, and we need to start working with these students to try to get them more acclimated to school so that they can stay and complete their degrees. Other studies from the disability services offices report that there's an increase in students with depression, anxiety, and related psychiatric disorders, and there's been a rise in students on the autism spectrum. Okay, so a lot of information. So why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing more students coming to the counseling centers, students with very severe diagnoses, and a real difficult time adjusting to college in terms of an emotional readiness standpoint? So there are a lot of reasons for this. One is that, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of students with mental health diagnoses did not go to college. Today, medication is much more effective. It's much more available to adolescents and high school students, and a lot of students are coming to college then with an existing mental health diagnosis and being on medication. So colleges have not always had to manage or help these students. This is a change. Another reason that we're seeing these trends is that there's less of a stigma to seek help, and college students are much more likely to go to the counseling center if they're feeling emotionally drained or a little bit depressed or anxious. They're much more likely to go, which is wonderful. Administrators and faculty are much more likely to refer today. Unfortunately, because of some of the past incidents at Columbine and Virginia Tech, first alert teams were developed, and faculty and staff were trained to identify students at risk. And so these students are much more likely to be referred probably than in the past. Another interesting reason for some of these trends have to do with what we call a perfect storm. So the economic realities in post-recession America, we have more students going to college than we ever have. This generation is also a different generation in terms of how they have grown up. This generation has been given a lot of opportunity to make up work, to do things over. And if they don't succeed the first time, they're often given another chance to succeed. This kind of fits with the bubble wrap generation, where the students and children and adolescents and high school students are often protected from the world and from failure. And the problem with this is that we have a generation of high school students going to college who have maybe never failed. They don't know what that's like, and they don't know how to deal with it. And so Dr. Parker is going to talk a lot about resilience and grit in a few minutes, but in many ways we are setting these students up to fail because they don't know how to deal with disappointment. They don't know how to deal with difficult situations. The Facebook generation is also, I think, part of this, some of these trends, in that Facebook and all of the Instagram and everything online, students are taught to show their best self. They don't post things that show them maybe in a negative light or that maybe they didn't do as well as they had hoped. It's very competitive, it's very performance oriented, and that perfect self is what is portrayed. So when that student does not do well, there's a great deal of shame, there's a great deal of guilt and depression that comes with that, because these individuals have not learned how to kind of accept the good and the bad with what they're going through. This type of generation encourages dependency, a sense of depression, and then a truncated self in terms of it's not realistic in terms of just being perfect all the time. College recruitment is also an issue that we've looked at in terms of these studies, and that the goal is to get into college. No matter what you do, we're going to get you into college, and then you have arrived. You have made it. The problem is college doesn't end there. That is really just the beginning. And I love this quote because I think to give your brain a vigorous workout and your soul a thorough investigation, to realize how very large the world is and to contemplate your desired place in it. That is the beauty of college. It really is a safe place to fail. It's a safe place to succeed. And these students are coming in without the tools and I think the realistic expectations that they need to succeed. So Those are the trends that we're seeing, and those are also the reasons that we're seeing some of these trends. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Parker.
Thank you, Dr. Lasek. We aren't overwhelmed with the negativity of what we've just presented. We're inspired to help our colleagues do something about that. But we wanted to start with some data-based evidence to depict the extensiveness and the chronicity of the growing problem of mental health issues in college students, so that we can all just sort of take a deep breath and say, what's going on and what can we do about it? We also do this in part to normalize that experience for any individual student or family or provider who's working with an individual, to know that they're not alone if they're struggling with these issues. It really is a growing national trend that we're all becoming very aware of. Having spent most of my career in higher education, I just want to honor everybody working in a college or university setting who every day endeavor to help students in multiple ways in and out of the classroom. Having said that, I think you'll all agree that it's not fair that we only ask people working in higher education settings to be the ones to sort of fix this problem. We're all in this together, and so as we go through the second part of today's presentation, again, we want to start with a broad framework that really calls on society to take a deep collective breath and to step back and see how this renewed pressure on the new generation of students transitioning to college has created some of the negative outcomes that Dr. Lasek described. And work together as a society to see if we can do a better job of raising young people to strive for excellence, including higher education if it's an appropriate choice for them, but not with the thought that failure is not an option. We need to take back the fact that you can learn sometimes the most from your mistakes if you're supported in doing so. And so we'll begin again with some broad sort of societal recommendations under this framework of resilience and grit, and then talk more specifically in a few minutes about how we can sort of zoom in and help an individual student who's really struggling with mental health issues at a more pragmatic level. But again, nobody is to blame. This is, again, a societal shift, as Dr. Lasek explained. I know a lot of my colleagues in higher education often feel bombarded by the students with these mental health issues in a sense that they have to fix the problem. Again, let's think about it as being a developmental lifespan issue that we can all contribute to positively, starting when these students are even very young. I'm going to draw upon a source in the next few slides, a book that I had a chance to co-edit this summer called Becoming Self-Determined, Creating Thoughtful Learners in a Standards-Driven and Missions-Frenzied Culture. It's published by AHEAD. You can see the link there. And we invited a number of wonderful colleagues around the country to contribute really thoughtful chapters that we invite families, students, but particularly our colleagues in higher education to read and refer to and pull out of to support the important work they're doing and to maybe get some ideas about what campuses are already doing to help address these issues as you go through the book. So that's going to be the source material for a lot of the next few slides. But let's talk first about resilience and then a parallel trait, grit. These are human traits. We know often that students with disabilities have greater levels of resilience and grit that we'll talk about in just a moment because of their lived experiences with disabilities. You know, these are young people who have to grow up trying harder and not always seeing their results pay off as successfully as their peers without disabilities. So as we begin to talk about resilience and grit, two human traits that we want to foster and strengthen and reinforce and honor in all students. If we're working with students with different types of disabilities or mental health issues in particular, let's start by recognizing that they may already have loads of resilience and grit because of those disabilities and help them reframe that as a real strength that sets them apart from their peers in that regard in a positive way. But resilience is basically the ability to bounce back from negative circumstances. When we get up and metaphorically dust ourselves off and keep going after a disappointing experience in life, we're exhibiting resilience. We know that there are a number of factors that are easy to influence that can help young people and others become more resilient. And you see that list on the screen. One is a caring, meaningful relationship with somebody else that allows trust and honesty, where the young person doesn't feel like your positive regard for me is conditional only upon all the success that Dr. Lasek was talking about. Instead, we want to cultivate mentoring relationships, parental relationships, professional relationships, where the young person feels like they can talk about their failures as well as their triumphs with us in equal measure. We want to encourage all students to, again, seek out assistance and utilize resources. As Dr. Lasek said, the good news is there's less stigma today about mental health issues, but we all know that many students still feel a lot of shame and embarrassment about mental health issues and may hold back or not know which services are available on campus that can help them with that. So we want to make sure that they're included in the orientation tours so they can learn about those services and be educated in a culture that makes it okay to go and use those services. The same is certainly true for disability services if the student has a documented disability. I won't go over all of these in detail with an interest toward time, but I do want to emphasize problem solving. To reinforce what Dr. Lasek talked about, we want to help students not see failure or challenges as a sign of failure, but instead a part of life and something that they can learn to get better at in terms of problem solving when it's okay to flounder for a while, when it's okay not to know the answer, when it's okay to maybe do poorly on one test if that leads us to figure out a better way to do better on the next test. So those are some of the things that we can do in general, again, to promote the student's resilience. The related concept of grit is a newer concept. Angela Lee Duckworth is a researcher now at the University of Pennsylvania. She coined the term recently and has a wonderful TED Talk video on grit that I encourage you to watch if you haven't yet. Grit is a combination of perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So while resilience is sort of a moment-in-time ability to get up and move on, grit is that longer-term ability to keep working hard over time to eventually reach a goal. We know that students with disabilities and students with mental health issues may have compromised or underdeveloped visions of a positive future because of the challenges that they're working with. So again, whenever we can help them formulate realistic long-term goals that matter to them, not necessarily to us, but importantly to them, and then help them figure out a way to get there, we're going to be enhancing their grit along the way. So all the work that we can do in our families, in private practice, and certainly on campuses to provide good career advice and assessment and training, helping students choose majors that they're really passionate about, helping them form mentorship relationships with faculty, particularly in a given department that they're interested in, go a long way toward helping all students increase their grit and that sort of sustainability factor that helps them get through the rougher times. We know from a lot of research that there are many benefits when we can help college students and younger individuals develop resilience and grit. Some studies have shown linkage between increased resilience and grit and greater academic achievement, more pro-social behaviors like seeking help or forming positive relationships, stronger mental health, and even greater peer acceptance. We also know that students, understandably, are more likely to be able to pursue their goals when things get rough if they have greater grit. Gritty individuals are also more likely to pursue higher education to a greater extent, and interestingly, to make fewer career changes throughout their lifespan, maybe because that grit early on allowed them to clarify what their passion was and really figure out how can I live a meaningful life pursuing this interest of mine early on. Duckworth and some of her colleagues also did some research at some Ivy League institutions and found that students who were grittier, based on a scale they had developed, had higher GPAs. So we know that higher education professionals are constantly being asked to evaluate and report on how their services contribute to the institutional goal, of persistence and graduation. What this research tells us is that if we promote students' resilience and grit along the way, we can perhaps reduce the mental health crises that they're going to experience. We can help them enjoy greater academic success. And in the long run, we can contribute toward that likelihood that they're going to finish in force, so to speak, that they're going to graduate on time and contribute to the institutional mission of being able to report, meaningful data in that regard. So again, we're all in this together. There are a lot of benefits to everybody involved in this equation when we help students with their emotional well-being as well as their academic success. One is linked to the other. Again, broadly, some of the other things we can do to foster resilience and grit. Again, we can normalize failure as growth opportunities. The Ivy League have set up on their own individual websites what they call the Resilience Project. We'll look at an example in a moment. But I know, for example, at Harvard, that one of the things that they're doing on their Resilience and Grit website is inviting people to contribute examples of when they didn't get a job, or they weren't promoted, or they didn't achieve a positive outcome. And they're invited to talk about what they learned from that. And it's amazing to see how those individuals turn those negative experiences into really powerful growth opportunities, and that they're confident enough about their overall success to talk about that in a public fashion. We can do that on any campus around the country and shape the culture in the process. Further down, you'll see publicizing models of resilience and grit. What I just talked about is an example of that. Some institutions are beginning to offer coursework on resilience and grit, and having students read about emotional fortitude and talk about those case studies or lived examples of that, something that can be done across different disciplines. Infusing growth mindset into challenging experience is also something that's very important. Carol Dweck is a psychologist at Stanford who's again done some TED Talks and some fascinating research on growth mindset that teaches us that when we're in that place of not knowing and having to figure out how to accomplish a goal is in and of itself a wonderful strengthening experience if we frame it as a positive experience. Her theory has been used in particular in community colleges, helping students in developmental math courses learn to work together and to support one another in challenging math classes while they learn how to get better at math. So again, we're providing a lot of resources today that we hope can deepen your understanding of some of these concepts if you want to pursue them further. Again, here's just a few examples of what some of the college examples are that we talk about in the book, particularly in the chapter on resilience and grit. I mentioned Harvard and the other Ivy League universities doing some fascinating work on their websites. Evergreen State College, again, there's an example in the book about an English course called Bouncing Back, Writing Personal Resilience. The link takes you to the course syllabus, so you can read more about how that instructor has put that together. At Green Mountain College in Vermont, the photograph on the right was taken there and shared with permission. The board says, this semester I will ... And everybody on the campus community, students, staff, faculty, are invited when they come by the Learning Center to fill in the blank. And so students and staff and faculty are publicizing some big goals that they're trying to work on this semester that they might benefit from in terms of getting support or help or encouragement along the way. So again, a lot of this so far is about broad culture shifting that we can all engage in at the elementary school level, the middle school, certainly the high school level, and on campuses to help all of us again sort of recalibrate our understanding of what success looks like. It's not about perfection. It's not about no bumps along the way. It's not about that Facebook generation persona that young people can only publicize their successes to be seen and valued as positive members of society. Instead, it's about reshaping the culture and saying that life is full of bumps. That's just how it works. And when we encounter those challenges, the manner in which we respond to them and the way in which we think about those experiences greatly affects the outcome. So it's not about avoiding them. It's about proceeding through them with grace, with resilience, with support from others, and with some humility that this is going to teach me something that will probably make me stronger and better next time around. We have to learn how to have those conversations with young people so that they can learn how to have them with their peers and with themselves, most importantly. We're going to get a little bit more specific now as we sort of wrap up this section on what we can do about this before we take your questions or engage in some discussion. And as I mentioned, this is largely some great information that Dr. Lasek helped me put together about working with students with identified mental health issues. So this might be particularly helpful for parents, for high school, school personnel, but also, of course, for our colleagues on college campuses as well, and providers in private or public mental health settings. So first of all, we want to continue to educate the upcoming generation about signs of emotional well-being and distress. We want them to know what the warning signs are. We want them to know that it's okay to report those, that it's important to report those. Sadly, here in Indianapolis, many people in the educational community are aware of the last 2 or 3 years of some young people, high school students, who committed suicide, perhaps in part, and I don't know this from personal knowledge of those families, but perhaps in part because the students felt that stigma again about not being able to report this distress, or didn't know how to read the warning signs themselves. They just knew they were overwhelmed, and I'm sure they were coping the best they could until they couldn't cope any longer. But we want to look for changes in patterns of eating or sleeping. We want to look at, significant changes in academic performance. Let me pause here and assure parents in particular and high school colleagues that if you have ADHD or learning disability or other learning differences, Asperger's comes to mind as well, ASD, that it's very predictable that students are going to face increased academic performance challenges during a transition year. So the 8th grader who goes off to high school and suddenly struggles in high school, that in and of itself isn't necessarily a sign of emotional well-being or distress. It's the transition challenge that a lot of students with disabilities encounter. That's also certainly going to be the case during freshman year of college. The question is, how does that dip in academic performance during a transition year affect that student's emotional well-being? And that's what we have to watch for. So we're looking for some combinations of these red flags to know that it sounds like we need to talk to the young person, help them get some help, find out what they know about their situation. If they isolate themselves from friends and family, that's another warning sign. Significant changes in mood, sudden eruptions of anger, might be a warning sign there as well too. Sadness and tearfulness would be another example. Increased use of alcohol or substances, and as Dr. Lasek said, in part that's always been seen as a rite of passage as students go off to college. There's a difference between some experimentation, where hopefully everybody remains safe, and a student who begins to regularly engage in the use of alcohol and substance abuse, particularly in a manner that affects their daily functioning. So that pattern of warning signs should, when we detect them or suspect them in a young person, should invite some conversations. And they can be tough conversations, and they're probably going to be more than one conversation. But it's time to get involved and try and help that young person figure out what's going on and whether or not they need help, can they get it, than to ignore it or hope that things are just going to get better on their own. When we're working with transitioning students who are now freshmen in college or soon going to be, we have some additional suggestions. Some of them have to do with whether that student already has a mental health diagnosis and or a disability, or whether they don't, and we're beginning to wonder about that. For students with existing diagnoses, we want to encourage them to register the disability services. And it's been interesting, having worked in those offices, again, on 3 different campuses for many years, and working now in private practice at CRG, it's been an aha for me to realize how many students don't necessarily qualify for a 504 plan, much less an IEP in high school, even if they have a diagnosis, or how many of those students don't want to seek out accommodations if they're taken out of class in the middle of class to get extra time on tests, for example. So I've come to appreciate more so how often accommodations and disability services in college can be a completely new experience for a transitioning student with a disability who's even known about that disability for many years. But we want them to register with disability services so that there's a safety net there in place in case the student's going to need accommodations in college. I always encourage students and their families to set up an appointment with the Disability Services Office while they're looking at colleges and come in and talk with that staff, break the ice, and begin the process of helping that student self-advocate by knowing who are these people, where are they on campus, what can I talk to them about, and how can they help me. We certainly also want to encourage those students for whom we already know about a mental health diagnosis or disability to identify and work out how to work with the counseling and health services on campus. Make sure they know where that is. Find out if you can transfer prescription medication to that office to make it easier to refill the medication when you're in college. Find out how many counseling sessions you're entitled to every semester. And or help the student find other providers in that community where they're going to be going to school, so that if they're 4 hours away or across the country and a crisis comes up or a medication need comes up, they don't have to ask their parents to work it all out back home or wait until they come home to get some help. We want them to have some qualified professional help right there that they can access and that they know how to access. Again, having that person basically identify a contact person in case the warning signs of emotional stress begin to unfold is important as well. That could be a parent, it could be a mentor, it could be somebody on campus, but we want to talk with the student in a calm, realistic way about that before they go off to college. Not to scare them, but to equip them with knowledge so that they can make healthy choices should the need come up once they're away from home and on the college campus. We also often work with students who, again, don't have that formal diagnosis, but as they prepare for the transition to college, something inside of us is just making us sensitive to, let's keep an eye on this young person and make sure that they're going to be okay. So we want to talk with our students, our sons, our daughters, our clients, about the challenges to the emotional well-being of all college students before they go off to college. Again, not to scare or alarm or increase anxiety, but to do so in a way that normalizes that experience and prepares the student to understand that it's going to be okay, that there is a lot of help, and that this is an experience that's happening to many college students if you go off to college and find yourself getting emotionally overwhelmed at some point. We don't want the student to have to figure out if that happens to him or her, can I talk to anybody about this and will they understand it? We want it to be a normal part of the conversation. Again, we want to help students understand specifically what some of the warning signs are. I know a lot of parents that I work with will Skype or FaceTime with their son or daughter if they're off at college. I think that old-fashioned term of eyeballing a young person is probably a really smart idea so the parents can not just hear their voice or read a text or an email, but to see them on a regular basis, even if it's on your phone screen, and get a sense of, gosh, they really are looking haggard, or gosh, it looks like they've lost a lot of weight, or put on a lot of weight. And again, that in and of itself isn't necessarily problematic, but it's one sign to notice and begin to look at that earlier list of several signs that in totality tell us it's probably time to get involved and to talk with the student about their well-being to make sure that they're going to be okay. So that covers some of the information, some of the suggestions that we hope can reinforce or add to your arsenal of tools in continuing to promote the well-being of young people. Everything that wasn't listed on a previous slide with an URL, we wanted to list here so that whether there was a website or printed publication, if you're interested in any of our references, we wanted to make sure that that was available to you. And what we'll do now is we've got about 10 minutes left. We want to thank you today again for being a part of the presentation. Remind you again that we will be posting this on the CRG website. So if you want to relook at it or have somebody else look at it in the future, that should be the case. All of our previous webinars are already on our website, and again, to access that, simply go to the CRG home webpage and click on the red YouTube icon in the upper right-hand corner, and that will take you to these webinars. We'll also again be sending out a brief evaluation form and information about the CE units after today's presentation. We have used the feedback on all the webinars, which we started this summer, to build this. Your comments have been very helpful, and we appreciate them. So we do take it seriously. We do come up with topics based on what you're saying you would like to hear more about. For those of you who are professionals in that role today, we are working hard to develop a more comprehensive webinar series in the future that might be longer and in greater detail for, again, professionals who might use that for some of their certification experiences as well. So stay tuned for more information about that through our newsletter or on our website or just by contacting CRG. So at this point, I think we're ready to see if there are any questions or comments that any of you would like to post. Again, you can do that by going to the chat box in your panel on the right side. And what Dr. Lasek and I will do now is to read through anything that's been posted and do our best to give a very quick but hopefully helpful response to that. Give us just a moment, please, and we'll pull up another computer screen with your comments. And let's see here, and I'll just read them, and we'll go from there. So the first one says, are there campus settings in Indiana do you feel are particularly good at dealing with students struggling with this? Great question. My experience with that, and I'll go first if I can, Dr. Lasek, is I don't know that any campus in particular does a better or worse job. It's really more about, in higher education, what is the capacity of the student to proactively utilize whatever resources are available on that campus. And our campuses are just rich with those resources. So starting with a disability services office, looking at a mental health center, a counseling center, as Dr. Lasek talked about, or a student health center, using faculty as mentors and as people who can help the student access other resources. That's really the key on any campus in Indiana or around the country, is you want to help the student develop those go-to people who can help them get help. That's really the more critical feature that we've seen from lots of clinical practice and research that often discerns the difference between a positive outcome and a negative outcome. It's often the case, sadly, that a student might be on a campus with loads of resources, but if they get overwhelmed and isolated and don't use any of those resources, it really doesn't matter in the moment that there are a lot of resources on the campus. It goes back to the student's knowledge of who they are and can they access those resources to get the help.
And I think the only thing I would add, I think students visiting the different campuses, the disability services office and the counseling centers, to allow them to determine where they feel most comfortable asking for help.
So again, when you're searching for college, when you're doing the campus tour, that's where you want to help your son or daughter or the student understand his or her strengths and weaknesses, and identify maybe before they make that campus visit by visiting the website, by, again, initiating contact with the disability service provider on that campus. What are the resources unique to that campus that can help a student with emotional issues, with mental health issues, with getting overwhelmed? And they'll tell you. And then you want to visit those campuses and those offices. All those visits are confidential. You know, that's not going to create a red flag at the admissions stage. The admissions office isn't going to know, well, this student went and spoke to a mental health counselor about her anxiety, so we probably shouldn't admit her because that may create a real problem for us and for her. All of this exploration of resources is confidential, and a lot of families aren't always aware of that, so we want to emphasize that. We have another comment from our colleague Larry Markle, who's the Director of Disability Services at Ball State, who, or excuse me, I'm sorry, the person wrote, excuse me, Larry, if you're listening, this is well deserved. A parent, it looks like, indicated that they highly recommend Ball State as a campus with a lot of this support. And they wrote that Larry Markle, who again is Director of Disability Services, has been very helpful to their son. So an unsolicited kudo to our colleague and his colleagues at Ball State University. So again, not to sound like a broken record, but for a lot of families and colleagues working with high school students who may not even qualify or want to use any accommodations in high school, as odd as it may sound, we do want to encourage them to go and meet with the disability services staff at any college that they're getting pretty serious about, and talk with them about their situation. Again, this is a confidential conversation. The Disability Services Office will explain how that student might qualify for accommodations, even if they haven't in high school. I've talked to some families who've gotten the misinformation that if their son or daughter doesn't qualify for accommodations in high school, that they can either qualify for those on the SAT or ACT or in college. And the good news is that's not true. You can qualify for accommodations on the ACT or the SAT and or in college, even if that hasn't happened elsewhere in high school, by going through the proper procedures, by documenting your disability and its current impact on your learning or testing. And the agencies and the different offices on campuses can help you with that. We can certainly help you answer those questions here at SEA if you want to come and work with us to get that kind of transition assistance for your son or daughter, your student as well too. Looks like there's another question. Can a student with a mental health issue who has not had an IEP in high school get a 504 for college? Well, to kind of follow along on what we were just saying, I'll start. First of all, a little nomenclature. IEPs and 504 plans apply to high schools. We don't write them for college students. When students with disabilities or mental health issues go off to college, they're now served under a different law, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what might happen there is instead of getting a 504 plan or an IEP in college, that student might instead, quote, qualify for accommodations at that college. And again, to do that, they would meet with the Disability Services Office on that college, present documentation of their disability or mental health issue. That can vary by college and by issue. It could be a letter from a psychiatrist. It could be an evaluation report from a psychologist. Again, the disability services staff usually will tell you on their website and certainly in person what documentation is necessary to qualify for accommodations. But again, it's certainly possible to do so even if that student hasn't needed or been able to qualify for a 504 plan or an IEP in high school. If a student does have an IEP or a 504 plan in high school, that documentation will help build the case for accommodations in college. But because 504 plans and IEPs are generally set up to promote success, and colleges under the ADA are only interested in providing equal access and not discriminating against a student who has a disability, the 504 plan or the IEP may not in and of itself be sufficient documentation. I don't want to get too detailed here, but oftentimes that 504 plan or IEP isn't based on a lot of current testing and data, and it's more likely that that may be necessary depending on the student and their diagnosis in college. So again, have the conversation with the disability services people, and they'll explain to you how that transition process will work. Okay? I think that's all the questions that we have for today. Dr. Lasek, are there any final comments or anything else you want to add to the discussion?
So just thank you all for joining us this afternoon.
I'll echo that. It's a real privilege to work with so many students and families here at CRG and colleagues. We're all in this together, and again, we thank you for your time and your interest today.